3 years ago, to this day, the OnePlus 7 Pro was announced. In most people's minds, this phone was peak OnePlus in every way. I share similar feelings because this is the best designed OnePlus phone, but that doesn't entirely mean that it's the best phone. Also, it's no longer 2019. But yes, this phone is worth buying, but let me tell you how it is using the unique OnePlus 7 Pro in 2022. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and yes, this is my fourth time reviewing this somehow, but it's just because I come back to this phone so often. Anyways, let's get started. So let's get through the specs so we can talk about how it is using the phone. Inside, we get the Snapdragon 855 chip with 6, 8, or 12 gigabytes of RAM with 128 or 256 gigabytes of UFS 3.0 storage, mine being the 12 gigabyte RAM 256 gigabyte storage version. No, this is not the 8GB 256 version that T-Mobile sells. This is the international one, which I have to explain a little bit later. This phone has moved from Android 9 to Android 10 and has been stuck with Android 11 for a little while. Android 12 is supposed to eventually come out on this phone, but I might have to check to see what XDA has for custom ROMs after I finish this review. To power this phone, we get an aging 4000 mAh cell, which allows for decent battery life even today. While the numbers probably won't impress you, I didn't really have any issues getting a full day out of this battery. To charge this phone, we get 30 watts of warp charge, which is surprisingly fast, at least when the phone came out. Moving outside of the phone, we get a pretty large and hefty phone, weighing in at about 206 grams. For the Nebula Blue one, we get this nice little two-tone color, which I said in my last review I finally noticed. Yep, it took me about 2 years of owning this phone to see that design change. Anyways, let's start with the left side where the volume rocker is, while on the right side we get the power button and the alert slider, going from silent to vibrate to ring. Like I said before, like the iPhone, but better. By the way, I gotta say the vibrating mechanism that they put in this phone is pretty solid and appealing, similar to modern day iPhones. Moving to the bottom, we get the dual SIM tray. Remember, this is not the T-Mobile version, as well as 2 microphones, a second loudspeaker, and the USB-C 3.1 Gen 1 port. Last time I said USB 3.1, but because of the dumb naming schemes, I was technically wrong. This is a 5 gigabit per second port, which is actually called USB 3.2 Gen 1. Yeah, it's frustrating trying to get the specs right when companies will just change names that they've been using for years. Either way, we finally move to the top where we see another microphone as well as that pop-up camera, which we'll talk about those specs a little bit later, but 3 years later, this still works. So no, it's not just going to break like people think. As for the materials, the outside is a shiny aluminum band, while the back is a matte or shiny glass, this one being a matte finish with the camera in the middle, while the flash lives under the glass. I always love the simple branding, but the OnePlus name doesn't really need to be here. As for the front, it is a curved piece of Gorilla Glass 5, just like the back, but it is uninterrupted, with very minimal bezels and chin area, while the forehead houses the earpiece that doubles as a loudspeaker, and that's it. Yep, that means superior listening experience with Dolby Atmos support when watching your uninterrupted videos thanks to that true all-screen design. The screen is a 6.67-inch OLED panel with 1440p resolution and a 90Hz display, being one of the first to have a 2K OLED display with 90Hz, with the second one being the Pixel 4 XL of all phones. And yes, I know they did 1080p on other phones, some going with LCD or 120Hz, but nothing looks as amazing and fluid as this one did, at least at the launch date. And this uninterrupted screen is the reason why this is arguably the best OnePlus phone design that ever came out, with many people praising the design even today. For me, the viewing experience is always amazing, but I still like to put a screen protector on there so then I can protect the screen, but it does make it a little bit shinier. And it kind of looks like I'm going to need one soon. The screen sits at 516 pixels per inch and has an under-display fingerprint scanner, which works well, but for me, Face Unlock is quicker and more reliable thanks to that screen protector. Funny how that works. Now the cameras range from bad to really good. Let's start with that pop-up camera. This is a 16 megapixel fixed focus sensor, which gives you decent shots, but it's not the best. And the video recording is annoying because it's 1080p at 30 frames per second, and that's the max. I talk about it more in my OnePlus 9 Pro video, ironically, but this is a whole issue that OnePlus needs to fix regarding their front camera performance on all of their phones. As for the rear sensor, we get 3 useful sensors, starting with the infamous 8 megapixel 3x telephoto sensor. I personally don't have any issues with this, and it's neither the worst or best sensor, but at least it does have optical image stabilization. But this does mean that it does not support 4K at all. Then we get the 16 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, one that actually focuses. It isn't the best, and I always thought that it was a fixed focus because of that until I made this review. Either way, shots are good. Not the worst, but also not the highlight of the camera, though it does support 4K video, but that is limited to 30 frames per second. As for the main sensor, this is a 48 megapixel sensor that does have optical image stabilization and looks the best of all the sensors, obviously. It shoots 16 megapixel shots while you can actually shoot 48 megapixel shots, but the quality isn't really worth the limitations that the 48 megapixel sensor brings. As for video, smooth 4K at 60 frames per second, but of course with that 5-minute video limit, even though it technically could go longer because sometimes the video is small. But here are some shots and music. Enjoy. Overall, solid camera setup with some disappointing limitations. We do get laser autofocusing in this camera array, which does seem to work pretty well. And sure, we get night shots with that nightscape mode, but the automatic processing always seems to look a little bit better in my eyes when you're shooting low light images. The good news is that the camera is pretty good, and that's the only issue that most people have with this phone. Like I said before, the answer is yes. This is one of my favorite newest phones besides the design of the S10 5G. But I can admit that it is aging. For one, this phone is a 4G phone with the 5G version existing, but even that only supports band 41, which is one of the bands that T-Mobile supports, but AT&T won't activate the 5G version of this phone. Though AT&T does support the OnePlus 7 Pro, but not the T-Mobile version, only the international one. Yeah, I'm not going to recommend AT&T to a single person until they fix these stupid restrictions and start respecting their customers. With all this said, Signal for me has never been an issue, and for a while I had a Verizon and T-Mobile card in this phone, but now I just have the T-Mobile one and that never really gave me any issues. As for the processor, it is aging, of course, but I have no major issues with this phone slowing down or games looking bad. Sure, you can't play Genshin Impact at max settings at 60 frames per second, but no phone can do that right now. For daily usage, everything flies and honestly feels kind of boring. But in this case, boring is good. The only thing I do notice is that this phone likes to drop below 60 frames per second on normal tasks. And yeah, I'm talking about even light apps. I have seen it happen more as time has gone on, but software updates will help this over time. Hopefully. I'm assuming this is why Oxygen OS 12 is taking so long. But for now, we get everything I want besides one thing. We get double tap to wake and sleep, smooth transitions, but we don't get the always on display, just an ambient display, which is nice, but I do enjoy having the option for always on display. While there's no wireless charging, the USB-C plug on the bottom allows for 30 watts of warp charging, which works well with this battery. We do get some type of water resistance, but your mileage may vary depending on your phone. However, I do assume that after all these years, these seals are kind of worn down. Honestly, just like a normal OnePlus device, the camera ends up being the deal breaker for most people. But I've gotten used to that pretty decent camera setup, and this will always be one of my favorite phones of all time. And should be your next purchase if the price is right. Just make sure you get the dual SIM one, because the T-Mobile one feels like it's not built the same. At the end of the day, the idea of using this phone seems boring. It isn't on the latest software version, but that doesn't really ruin the aspect of using this phone. During this review, I found myself being bored while using this phone, and it made me feel indifferent on whether this is a good phone or not. I've had this phone for 3 years, and it just felt like another day every time I would pick up the phone. But unlike other parts of our life, a boring feeling phone is actually a good thing. There have been many times where it felt annoying or stressful trying to search stuff on other phones because I knew that the experience was just going to be so clunky. But with the OnePlus 7 Pro, everything is simple, reliable, and most of all, how you want your phone to actually be. And that's my review of the OnePlus 7 Pro, the first, best, and only real Pro phone that OnePlus has made. But what do you think? Are hole punch screens not that bad? Are you bitter that pop-up cameras are more reliable than you thought? Let me know in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.